Most people are convinced that the worst thing you could ever do to someone avoidant is fight with them, beg them to stay, or corner them emotionally until they finally react. But here's the strange truth nobody talks about. That kind of reaction is actually the thing that makes an avoidant feel safest, because it confirms exactly what they already believe deep down, that closeness is messy, unpredictable, and eventually turns into chaos. It gives them a familiar role to play. They know how to survive an argument. They know how to weather tears and accusations. What they have never learned how to survive is calm. The goodbye that actually breaks an avoidant person doesn't sound anything like a fight. It isn't loud. It doesn't come with an explanation stretched out over hours. It doesn't demand closure or beg for one final conversation to make sense of everything that happened between you. It sounds calm. It sounds settled. It sounds final, in the quiet way that a decision sounds when someone has already made peace with it long before they ever said it out loud. And when you walk away like that, without falling apart in front of them, without pointing fingers, without running after them one more time just to be sure they understood, something inside them quietly cracks. Not because you wounded them on purpose, but because you took away the one thing they had been leaning on without ever admitting it, even to themselves: your emotional availability, offered freely, with no commitment required in return. This is the kind of goodbye that shatters someone avoidant, not with noise or drama, but with a stillness that stays with them long after the conversation is over, long after the messages stop, long after they've told themselves they're fine. It works precisely because it removes the one thing an avoidant person unconsciously depends on to feel secure, which is knowing that you are emotionally there for them even when they give almost nothing back in return. Take that away cleanly, without a scene, and you take away the entire foundation they didn't know they were standing on. Most people completely misread avoidant attachment. They assume that when someone avoidant pulls away, it means they don't care, that indifference is the whole story. That assumption is wrong, and it's wrong in a way that keeps people stuck for years. They pull away because they do care, and caring feels like danger to them. Closeness, for someone wired this way, doesn't register as warmth or comfort the way it does for most people. It registers as exposure, as pressure, as a slow loss of control over their own inner world. So the moment a relationship starts to deepen past a certain point, an avoidant person will instinctively start building distance without even fully noticing they're doing it. They delay plans that used to feel easy. They withdraw emotionally in small, almost invisible ways. They go quiet for reasons that have nothing to do with anything you did wrong. It was never about you falling short. Intimacy itself is what triggers the fear, and the fear arrives long before they have language for it. They start explaining themselves, laying out every reason why they deserve to be chosen. They plead, they confront, they ask for reassurance over and over, needing to hear it again and again just to feel steady for a moment. They try desperately to be understood, believing that if they can just find the right words, the distance will close. And without meaning to, every single one of those reactions confirms the exact belief the avoidant person has been carrying their whole life, that closeness always turns into chaos eventually, no matter who it's with. So when you leave the wrong way, angry, dramatic, emotionally unraveling in front of them, spilling everything you've been holding back, you end up reinforcing their internal story instead of breaking it. You become living proof in their mind that attachment is unsafe, unpredictable, and destabilizing, exactly what they suspected all along. It becomes a story they can tell themselves for years, evidence they can point back to whenever someone new gets too close. But when you leave the right way, something completely different happens inside them. Something fractures quietly, not violently, not visibly, but permanently, in a place they can't easily access or explain to anyone. Because the goodbye that genuinely shakes an avoidant person doesn't ask for anything. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't over-explain itself in a desperate attempt to be justified or understood. It doesn't try to squeeze out sympathy or guilt. It doesn't leave the door cracked open just in case they change their mind 6 months from now. It is calm. It is contained. It is resolved, and resolution is the one thing their nervous system has never had to sit with before. And that emotional resolution is exactly what destabilizes them more than any argument ever could. Avoidant people feel most comfortable when they sense they're in control of the emotional temperature of a relationship, even if they'd never phrase it that way to themselves. They pull back and you chase. They go silent, and you fill the silence with explanations and reassurances. They hesitate before committing to anything, and you wait patiently on the other side of that hesitation, telling yourself it just takes time. As long as they can feel that you're still emotionally available, even while they're giving almost nothing back, the whole dynamic feels safe and manageable to them. It lets them keep 1 foot in and 1 foot out indefinitely. But the second you remove yourself without collapsing emotionally, without giving them a performance of pain they can respond to or manage, that entire structure flips upside down. The goodbye that shatters an avoidant carries a very particular kind of energy. Without saying it outright, it communicates something like this: I see exactly who you are. I understand your patterns better than you think I do. I'm not confused about any of it, and I never needed you to explain yourself. And I'm choosing myself anyway, not out of anger, but out of clarity. That single unspoken sentence violates the internal script an avoidant person has been running their whole life, often since childhood. They're prepared for one of 2 outcomes because those are the only 2 outcomes they've ever encountered before. Either you stay and quietly suffer, absorbing the distance without complaint, becoming smaller and smaller to remain acceptable to them, or you leave loudly in a blaze of anger and accusations that gives them something concrete to defend against, something that lets them cast you as the unreasonable one. What they are never prepared for, what genuinely has no script attached to it in their mind, is quiet self-respect. A calm, grounded exit with no fireworks attached and nothing left to argue over. So when you leave without blame, without resentment, without leaving any emotional hooks behind for them to grab onto later, their nervous system genuinely cannot categorize what just happened. It doesn't fit into either of the boxes they've relied on their whole life. And when a loss can't be filed away and categorized the way they're used to, it doesn't resolve itself the way other losses have. It lingers in the background, unprocessed, refusing to settle into a neat narrative they can move past. This kind of goodbye doesn't label them as avoidant. It doesn't dissect their behavior for them or hand them a diagnosis wrapped in a farewell speech. It doesn't psychoanalyze their childhood wounds or explain their attachment style back to them in painstaking detail. It simply states one plain truth, spoken once and not repeated. This connection no longer fits what I need emotionally, and then it ends. No maybe someday tucked in at the end to soften the blow. No promise that you'll always be around waiting if they ever change. No open invitation to circle back whenever it's convenient for them. And that absence of an invitation is exactly what makes it so unbearable for them to sit with, because avoidant people quietly rely on the assumption that you're still there emotionally, tucked away and available, even during the long stretches when they're not showing up for you at all. This goodbye removes that safety net entirely, without warning, without negotiation, and without a backup plan they can quietly count on. What truly rattles an avoidant person isn't being misunderstood, the thing they secretly expect and almost prepare for. It's being understood with complete accuracy, without cruelty attached to that understanding. You didn't walk away out of confusion about what was happening between you. You didn't walk away because you felt insecure or unworthy of more. You didn't walk away hoping they'd suddenly panic and chase after you, using absence as a strategy. You walked away because you saw the entire situation with total clarity, maybe for the first time in the whole relationship. And clarity, more than anger ever could, is what truly confronts someone who has spent their life avoiding being seen too closely. When an avoidant person realizes that someone saw their patterns clearly, understood exactly why they behaved the way they did, accepted their limitations without trying to fix them or punish them for having those limitations, and still chose to walk away peacefully anyway, it slips right past every defense mechanism they've spent years building. There's no argument left to win because nothing was framed as a fight. There's no accusation to deny because nothing was thrown at them. There's no emotional fire that needs putting out because you didn't set one. There's only absence, clean, quiet, undeniable absence sitting where a person used to be. And that's exactly where the psychological impact starts to run deeper than any confrontation ever could. Avoidant people are experts at compartmentalizing their emotions. A skill they've often practiced since they were children. They suppress what they feel almost automatically. They distract themselves with anything readily available: work, other people, new projects, anything that keeps the mind occupied. They rationalize the distance they create as independence, or as simply being busy, or as not being ready yet for something real. But unresolved loss doesn't just vanish because it's been pushed aside and labeled as something manageable. It waits patiently in the background, indifferent to how well it's been ignored. And the goodbye that shatters them is exactly the kind that creates that unresolved loss, because you didn't collapse under the weight of leaving. You didn't demand that they change who they fundamentally are. You didn't shrink yourself down or negotiate your worth just to remain in their life on smaller terms. You exited with your dignity fully intact, walking at your own pace toward your own life. And dignity, more than anything else, deeply unsettles someone who has spent their whole life equating closeness with risk and vulnerability with danger. Over time, this goodbye replays in their mind on a loop they didn't choose and can't quite turn off. Not the specific words you used, which tend to blur with time, but the tone underneath them, the neutrality in your voice, the complete absence of blame, even when blame would have been understandable, the unmistakable sense that you were whole and steady without needing them at all to feel that way. And that realization is what quietly activates a grief they didn't expect to feel and don't know how to name. Not immediately, usually, because immediate grief would require immediate honesty with themselves. Often it arrives weeks or even months later, once the distractions have finally faded, once the dating apps start to feel repetitive and hollow, once the familiar emotional patterns with other people start to feel thin and unsatisfying by comparison to what they once had and didn't protect. Eventually they realize, often quietly and without telling anyone, that nobody else has offered them connection without pressure the way you once did, without keeping score, without demanding constant proof of love. And suddenly the silence they used to crave so badly, the space they fought so hard to protect, becomes something loud and uncomfortable to sit inside of, echoing in a way it never used to. This kind of goodbye also strips away their ability to casually re-enter your life whenever they feel like testing the waters again. Many avoidant people don't come back later because they genuinely want deep connection this time around. They come back to test whether access is still available on the same old terms. A casual hey text sent late at night. A low-effort check-in disguised as friendliness. A small breadcrumb dropped just to see how quickly and how warmly you respond. What they're really doing underneath all of it is checking whether you're still emotionally available on standby, waiting in reserve. But when your goodbye was clean and self-contained, with nothing left dangling and no thread to pull, there's simply no opening for them to walk back through. The door isn't slammed. It's just no longer there in the shape they remember. And that's exactly when a subtle kind of panic can start to surface in them, usually far later than anyone would expect. Not dramatic, visible panic that anyone around them would notice, but a quiet, internal loss of control that they'll never quite explain to another person. Avoidant people fear being needed too intensely by someone, but they also fear becoming irrelevant to someone who once genuinely mattered to them. So when you leave calmly, without resentment or emotional wreckage trailing behind you for them to clean up or respond to, you become psychologically unreachable to them in a new and unfamiliar way. Not because you're cold or indifferent to what happened between you, but because you're complete on your own, with or without them in the picture. And completeness, real and demonstrated rather than performed, is deeply threatening to someone whose entire sense of safety has been built around emotional distance and self-sufficiency. They start to wonder things they've never had to wonder before, questions that used to feel irrelevant to their carefully managed life. Did I misread this person completely, mistaking patience for weakness? Did I let something rare slip through my fingers because I couldn't tell the difference between space and abandonment? Did my own avoidance end up costing me more than I ever allowed myself to admit, even privately? And here's the part most people never see coming, the part that makes this kind of goodbye so different from an ordinary breakup. This kind of goodbye doesn't just change how they feel about you, it forces them to actually feel something about themselves, which is the one thing they've spent years structuring their entire life to avoid. Avoidant people spend their existence sidestepping internal discomfort at almost any cost, filling every quiet moment before it can turn into reflection. Your calm, grounded exit becomes a mirror they can't easily look away from, no matter how busy they keep themselves. It reflects their emotional limitations back at them without ever attacking them directly or naming them out loud. It doesn't ask them a single question in the moment, and yet it raises countless ones inside their head over the weeks that follow. And those questions don't shout at them the way an argument would. They whisper, low and persistent. They follow them into quiet moments, into late nights alone with nothing to distract them, into new connections that never quite feel the way things once felt with you, no matter how hard they try to recreate that feeling elsewhere. The real power behind this kind of goodbye was never about punishment, and it's worth being honest with yourself about that distinction. It's about consequence. And those are two very different things that get confused all the time. You never tried to take their power away from them by controlling how they felt or forcing a reaction. You simply reclaimed your own power quietly and without announcement. There was no emotional tug-of-war involved, no guilt-tripping disguised as honesty, no demand that they take accountability for anything in front of you. And that's precisely what makes it so heavy for them to carry afterward, because guilt is something a person can defend themselves against, argue with, minimize, or explain away. Calm acceptance is not. There's nothing to argue with when nobody's arguing. You never said, "You hurt me, and now you need to fix this," framing the ending as something they owed you. What you communicated instead, without needing a single dramatic word or raised voice, was simply, "This no longer works for me," and that's enough of a reason on its own, complete and without appeal. For someone avoidant, that lands like a full emotional stop, a door closing with no hinge left to swing back open later, no matter how gently they knock. A lot of people worry that leaving this way means the avoidant person simply won't care at all, that calm exits go unnoticed and unfelt. But that fear comes from a basic misunderstanding of how avoidant attachment actually works underneath the surface. Avoidant people don't process loss the moment it happens the way some people do. They delay it. They suppress it, sometimes for a very long time. They intellectualize it, turning a feeling into a thought or a theory so they don't have to sit with the raw discomfort underneath. And then, one day, often when they least expect it, once there's nothing left available to suppress it with, it finally arrives, uninvited and impossible to explain away. It doesn't always show up as longing for you specifically. Sometimes it shows up as regret they can't quite locate the source of, as curiosity about what might have been different, as a strange, unresolved emotional weight that sits with them for no obvious reason, especially when the person they lost never fell apart or self-destructed the way they might have unconsciously expected or even hoped, since that would have made things easier to categorize and dismiss. This kind of goodbye rewrites who you are in their memory, slowly and without your involvement, instead of being remembered as too emotional or too demanding, which is often the tired story avoidant people tell themselves and others about the people they've pushed away over the years. You become the one who left without any drama at all. The one who never begged for another chance. The one who never chased after them once the door closed. The one who chose self-respect over staying close by at any emotional cost to themselves. And that version of you becomes genuinely haunting to them over time because it directly contradicts their long-held belief that emotional closeness is inherently unstable and dangerous. You end up proving, without ever intending to prove anything at all, that emotional maturity can exist even in the act of separating from someone you once cared about deeply. Whether or not they ever come back eventually stops mattering, and that shift itself is important because the true power of this kind of goodbye was never really about what it does to them in the end. It's about what it does to you in the here and now while you're still living through it. It closes the loop that would otherwise stay open for months or years. It regulates your own nervous system instead of leaving it stuck in a state of waiting. It ends the exhausting cycle of overthinking every interaction, every text, every silence, and quietly bargaining with yourself over what could have been different if you'd said or done one more thing. It gives you permission to grieve without any humiliation attached to the process, without needing to justify your pain to anyone, and to heal without betraying yourself along the way by going back to something that never truly served you. And ironically, that internal shift happening inside you is exactly what makes the goodbye permanent in their mind, whether they ever admit that to themselves or not. If an avoidant person ever does come back after a goodbye like this, it feels noticeably different from anything that came before it, and you'll likely sense that difference immediately. There's no casual tone anymore in how they approach you, no breadcrumbs scattered here and there to see what sticks, no half-hearted check-ins meant only to test the water without any real risk to themselves, because on some level they can sense that access has changed completely, even if they can't articulate exactly how. They can feel that you are no longer sitting around waiting to be chosen on their timeline, and that realization forces them to confront the one thing they've spent their entire life carefully avoiding: the actual cost of emotional distance. Not through punishment inflicted on them by you, but through the natural consequence that follows any choice, quietly playing out exactly as it was always going to, with or without their permission. So the goodbye that truly shatters every avoidant person was never really a message at all, and it was never something you delivered to them for effect. It's an emotional stance you take toward your own life. It's the exact moment you stop trying so hard to be understood by someone who was never fully capable of offering that understanding, and instead start standing firmly in your own truth, regardless of whether they ever catch up to it. It's when you walk away without bitterness weighing you down and slowing your steps, without needing to feel superior or vindicated, without collapsing under the emotional pressure of the moment, even when every part of you wants to. It's when you choose peace over the fading possibility of what things might have eventually become if only they'd changed. And for someone who has spent a lifetime equating attachment with danger, watching you walk away calm and grounded is far more unsettling than any argument, any confrontation, or any dramatic exit could ever hope to be. Because the one thing an avoidant person can never fully regulate, no matter how skilled they've become at managing everything else, is the loss of someone who refused to lose themselves trying to love them properly. And that particular kind of goodbye echoes in their mind far longer and far louder than any words spoken in anger ever could, resurfacing quietly for years in moments they never see coming. It's worth understanding why this specific kind of ending lands so differently than every other ending they've experienced before. Most people who leave an avoidant partner leave in a way that can be explained away, filed under a familiar category, and eventually forgotten with the help of a story that makes sense. Someone left because they were too needy. Someone left because they couldn't handle the space. Someone left because they wanted more than the avoidant person was capable of giving at the time. Each of those stories lets the avoidant person stay comfortably inside their own narrative, the one where closeness really is the problem and distance really was the solution. A calm, grounded exit refuses to hand them that story. It doesn't give them anything to file away. It simply exists as a fact they have to sit with on their own terms, without your help interpreting it for them. This is also why timing rarely matters as much as people assume it does. It isn't about leaving at a dramatic moment or delivering the goodbye during some pivotal conversation designed for maximum impact. The impact comes later, almost always. It comes in the ordinary stretches of life that follow, in the small quiet hours when nothing is happening and nothing is distracting them from their own thoughts. That's when the absence you left behind starts to take up more space than your presence ever did, precisely because it isn't loud enough to ignore or explain away with a convenient story. There's also something important happening on your side of this that deserves just as much attention as what happens on theirs. Choosing to leave this way, calmly and without collapsing, isn't just a strategy for how they'll remember you. It's a genuine act of self-preservation that has very little to do with them at all once you look closely at it. It means you stopped performing pain for someone who was never going to reward it with the closeness you wanted. It means you stopped treating your own peace as something to be earned through patience and suffering. It means you finally trusted that your worth didn't depend on whether someone who struggles to attach ever managed to attach to you specifically. That shift changes more than just this one relationship. It changes how you show up in every relationship that comes after it. Because you've proven to yourself, not just to them, that you can walk away from something that mattered without abandoning yourself in the process. You've shown yourself that peace doesn't require someone else's permission or someone else's readiness to meet you halfway. And that lesson, once it's truly learned, tends to stay with you long after the specific person who taught it to you has faded into the background of your life, becoming just one more chapter instead of the whole story. So if you find yourself standing at the edge of a goodbye like this one, unsure whether staying calm means you don't care enough or love hard enough, remember that the opposite is true. The calm isn't the absence of feeling, it's the presence of clarity, earned the hard way, after enough cycles of chasing and waiting and hoping to finally see the pattern for what it is. Let the goodbye be quiet. Let it be complete. Let it be the one thing they never saw coming, not because you planned it that way, but because you finally chose yourself without needing their permission to do it.